It started as lines drawn in beach sand, and now it is on almost everything you have ever bought. A young man is sitting on the sand in Miami, somewhere near his grandfather's apartment, in the winter of 1948, going into 1949. He is in his 20s. He has dropped out of graduate school. He has a problem stuck in his head that he cannot put down, and he is broke enough that he has come south to live cheap and think. He is staring at the ocean, not really seeing it, when his hand starts moving on its own. He pushes 4 fingers into the wet sand and drags them toward himself. 4 straight grooves appear, side by side. He looks at them, and in that ordinary little gesture, a man named Joseph Woodland just sketched the skeleton of a code that, within his own lifetime, would be printed on more objects than any other mark ever made by human beings. He did not know that. Nobody could have known that. The lines he drew that day would sit unused for a quarter of a century, mocked, abandoned, sold off for almost nothing, before the world finally built the machines that could read them. This is the story of the barcode. Those little black stripes you have scanned 10,000 times without once looking at them. The thing on the back of the cereal box, the bottom of the soda can, the tag on your shirt, the side of the package on your porch. You have never thought about it for more than a second in your whole life, and that is exactly the point. It was designed to disappear, but behind that strip of lines is a story about 2 young engineers who tried to fix the most boring problem in America, a problem so dull that nobody else wanted to touch it, and about how their answer was so far ahead of its time that one of them died before it ever worked. It is about a beach, a patent that went nowhere, a circle that smeared, a pack of chewing gum, and the quiet morning in Ohio when 100 years of standing in line finally started to end. To understand why 2 men would pour their lives into this, you have to walk into an American grocery store in the late 1940s, because it was a very different place than the one you know. There was no scanner. There was no register that knew what anything cost. Every single item in the store had its price written or stamped on it by hand, often with a little ink gun a stock boy carried up and down the aisles. When you got to the front, the cashier picked up each can, each box, each bag, found the price, and punched it into a mechanical register, key by key. A busy checkout was a wall of clattering keys and ringing bells. It was slow. It was the bottleneck of the entire store. On a Friday evening, the lines could snake back into the aisles, and there was nothing anybody could do but wait. And it was worse than just slow. Behind the scenes, nobody really knew what was in the store. If a manager wanted to know how many cans of peaches he had sold that week, he had to count them, or guess. Stores ran on intuition, and on the experience of the man who had worked there for 20 years. Mistakes were constant. Cashiers misread prices, fat-fingered the keys, or quietly charged friends less. Whole product lines would run out on a Saturday because no one had a clean number telling them stock was low. The grocery business in America was enormous and growing. The supermarket was becoming the center of the American town, and yet the thing that ran it was a person with a pencil and a good memory. Picture the cashier herself, because she carried the whole burden. She had to memorize hundreds of prices, hold them in her head all day, and key in every one by hand without looking, the way a typist works a keyboard. A good checker was prized for her speed and her accuracy, and training one took weeks. When she made an error, and on a long shift everyone did, the store either lost money or the customer did. At the end of the day, balancing the register against the cash drawer was its own slow ritual. Multiply that by every lane, in every store, in a country with tens of thousands of supermarkets, and you start to feel the size of the problem. The whole machine of American retail rested on human hands and human memory. And human hands and human memory get tired. The men who owned these stores knew it was a problem. They just did not think it was a problem anyone could solve. The technology to solve it did not exist yet. There were no cheap computers. There were no lasers at all. The idea that a machine could look at a can of soup and instantly know its name and its price belonged to science fiction, and the people running grocery chains were not in the science fiction business. They were in the business of moving cans. So when the dean of the Drexel Institute of Technology in Philadelphia got a knock on his door around 1948, he did what busy administrators do. He said no. The man at the door was a local food chain executive. The story that has come down to us is that he came to the engineering school with a simple plea. He wanted somebody to invent a way to read product information automatically at the checkout, to get the customers through faster, and to finally know what was selling. The dean was not interested. It sounded like a nuisance. He turned the man away. But the conversation was overheard. A graduate student named Bernard Silver, a young engineer everyone called Bob, caught wind of it. And where the dean heard a nuisance, Silver heard a challenge worth chasing. He went to a friend, a fellow Drexel man, a lanky and restless inventor, a few years older than himself. That friend was Joseph Woodland. Woodland was not an ordinary 20-something. He had grown up in Atlantic City, New Jersey, born in 1921. As a Boy Scout, he had learned Morse code, the language of dots and dashes, and it had lodged itself somewhere in the back of his mind. During the Second World War, he had worked as a technical assistant on the Manhattan Project at Oak Ridge in Tennessee, on the effort that built the atomic bomb. He had a mechanical engineering degree from Drexel and a head full of ideas. One of his earlier inventions had been a better system of elevator music. He was the kind of man who could not look at a problem without trying to take it apart. So when Silver brought him the grocery puzzle, Woodland did not just nod and move on. He latched onto it. He became convinced that there had to be a way to put information onto a product in a form a machine could read, the way a player piano reads the holes in a paper roll. He believed it so strongly that he made a decision that worried his family. He quit his teaching post at Drexel. He cashed in some stock, and he went down to Florida to stay in his grandfather's apartment in Miami Beach, where he could live on very little and do nothing but think about this single question. How do you write a price in a way that light can read? Which brings us back to the beach, and to those 4 fingers in the sand. Woodland told the story many times over his long life, and it stayed remarkably consistent. He was sitting on the sand, turning the problem over, thinking about Morse code, those dots and dashes he had learned as a boy, and he had a thought that most of us would never have. What if you took the dots and dashes and you pulled them straight down? A dot, stretched downward, becomes a thin line. A dash, stretched downward, becomes a wide line. Lay them side by side, thin and thick and thin and thick, and you have a pattern that a machine could scan across and read. The same information Morse carried, but now written in stripes instead of beeps. He said his fingers were in the sand when it hit him and that he dragged them toward himself and saw the lines appear. Decades later, telling a reporter about that moment, he described it plainly. He said he poked his fingers in the sand and pulled them back, and there were 4 lines, and he thought, that is it. A small motion on an empty beach. The first barcode in the world was drawn in sand by a man who would be erased by the next tide, and then it was gone. But the idea was not gone. Woodland went back north, and he and Silver got to work turning that flash of insight into something real, and something they could protect. And here the story takes its first strange turn, because the code they actually patented did not look like the stripes you know at all. They worried about a problem that still haunts barcodes to this day. A line of stripes has a direction. If you scan across it the right way, you read it. If the product is turned sideways, the beam crosses the lines the wrong way and reads nothing. In a grocery store, where a clerk grabs a can however it comes off the belt, you cannot count on anyone holding it just so. Woodland's answer was elegant. He took his straight lines and he wrapped them into a circle. A set of concentric rings like a tiny archery target. A bullseye. Because a circle has no up or down, The scanner could read it from any angle. Spin the can any way you like, the rings look the same. On the 20th of October, 1949, the two men filed their patent application. They called it, in the flat language of the patent office, a classifying apparatus and method. It took nearly 3 years to be granted. On the 7th of October, 1952, the United States issued patent number 2,612,994 to Bernard Silver and Norman Joseph Woodland. They had, on paper, invented the barcode. They had a machine-readable label and a way to scan it. And then, nothing happened. For years and years, nothing happened at all. The trouble was that they had invented the answer to a question the world could not yet hear. To read their code, you needed two things that simply did not exist in any affordable form. You needed a powerful, focused, reliable beam of light to sweep across the pattern. And you needed a brain fast enough to take what that light measured and instantly turn it into a number, a name, a price. The light source they were forced to use in their early experiments was a 500-watt bulb, the kind that throws off enough heat to be a fire hazard, and even then the signal it produced was weak and hard to read. The computer side was worse. The machines of the early 1950s that could do this kind of work were the size of a room, cost a fortune, and lived in laboratories and government buildings. The notion of putting that kind of computing power next to every cash register in America was absurd. It would be like proposing that every diner install a jet engine. Woodland understood this. He took a job at IBM, the great American computer company, partly in the hope that a giant like IBM might one day develop his idea. He even tried to get the company interested. IBM looked at the patent, studied it, and came back with a verdict that must have stung. They told him the concept was sound, but that the technology to make it practical was probably 20 years away. They were almost exactly right. In 1952, the same year the patent was granted, Woodland and Silver gave up trying to build it themselves. They sold their invention. The buyer was Philco, an electronics company, and the price was $15,000. That was real money in 1952, but set it against what the barcode would later be worth, and it is one of the great bargains in the history of invention. Philco soon sold it onward to RCA. The patent passed from hand to hand, and then, in time, it simply expired. The protection ran out. The idea two young men had chased to a Miami beach and back became free for anyone to use, and for a long while, nobody bothered. Then came the part of the story that no telling of it can soften. Bernard Silver, the man who had overheard the dean's refusal and refused to let it go, the man who started all of it, did not live to see any of it work. He died on the 28th of August, 1963, of pneumonia brought on by leukemia. He was 38 years old. The first time a barcode would ever ring up a sale in a real store was still 11 years in the future. Silver went to his grave with a patent to his name, and no idea, no way of knowing, that the thing he and his friend had dreamed up would one day touch nearly every transaction on Earth. His name is on the document. It is almost never on the lips of the people who scan his invention a billion times a day. For most ideas, that would be the end. A clever patent, a quick sale, an early death, a slow fade into the files. But the barcode had something rare going for it. The problem it solved was not going away. Every year the supermarkets got bigger, the lines got longer, the lost inventory got more expensive, and the need that the food executive had carried to Drexel's door only grew. The idea was waiting. It was waiting for the world to catch up to it. And in the late 1960s and early 1970s, the world finally did. Two things changed. The first was the laser. In 1960, the first working laser was built, and within a decade, lasers had shrunk and cheapened to the point where you could imagine One small and cheap enough to sit inside a checkout counter, sweeping a thin, bright, accurate beam across a label hundreds of times a second. This was the focused light Woodland had needed and never had. The second was the integrated circuit, the computer chip. The room-sized machines of the 1950s were collapsing into small, affordable boxes. The brain that could turn a smear of light into a price was finally getting cheap enough to put in a store. The two missing pieces, the eye and the mind, both arrived at roughly the same time. IBM's 20-year estimate was coming true almost to the year. Now, the grocery industry itself moved. By the early 1970s, the big chains had grown tired of waiting and decided to do something almost unheard of. Instead of each company building its own private system, they came together. A committee of grocery and industry leaders agreed that if a code was going to work, every store and every manufacturer in the country had to use the exact same one. A can of soup made in one state had to scan in a store 2,000 miles away. They set out to choose a single national standard, one symbol to rule the whole American grocery business. They invited the great technology companies to submit designs and compete for it, and the company best positioned to win was the one that already had Joseph Woodland on its payroll, IBM. Woodland was now a senior man at IBM. The company moved him to its facilities in North Carolina to be part of the effort, the very effort he had hoped for 2 decades earlier. But the engineer who would actually crack the final design was a quieter colleague, a man named George Laurer. Laurer was given the job of taking the old idea and making it work for real, in a real store, at real speed. And one of the first things he did was look at Woodland's beloved bullseye, the circular code, and conclude that it had to go. The circle had a fatal flaw, and it was not about scanning. It was about printing. To put a barcode on millions of soup cans and cereal boxes, you had to print it on a high-speed press, the same press that printed the label, running at tremendous speed. And printing presses smear, just a little, in the direction the paper is moving. On a pattern of straight vertical lines, a tiny smear barely matters, because the lines just get a hair thicker or thinner, and the scanner can still tell them apart. But on a circle, a smear in one direction distorts the rings, blurs the edges, and turns a clean target into a muddy blob that no scanner could read. The very shape that made the code easy to scan made it nearly impossible to print. So Laurer went back to where Woodland had started, before the circle, back to the straight lines in the sand. He laid out a rectangle of vertical black bars and white spaces of varying widths. To solve the old fear that a clerk might scan it sideways, he and the team designed the scanner to throw its beam in a crisscross, an X-shaped pattern of light, so that no matter how the package was turned, at least one sweep of the laser would cut cleanly across the bars. He built into the code a set of guard marks at the start, the middle, and the end, so the machine always knew where the pattern began and where it stopped. And he tied the stripes to a 12-digit number, a unique fingerprint for every product in the country. The first digits would say who made it. The next would say exactly which item it was. The store's own computer would hold the price, so a manager could change a price in one place and have it change at every register at once. This rectangle of bars and that 12-digit number became the Universal Product Code, the UPC, the thing that is, right now, within arm's reach of you in some form. In 1973, the grocery industry formally adopted IBM's design as the national standard. After 25 years, Joseph Woodland's idea finally had a body the world could use. Now it just needed to prove it could work outside a laboratory, on an ordinary morning, in a real store, in front of real customers who had no idea anything historic was about to happen. That morning came on the 26th of June, 1974, in a town called Troy, Ohio, at a Marsh supermarket that had been wired up as the test site. It was early, just after 8 in the morning. The store had been specially equipped with the new scanners and a computer in the back, and the shelves had been stocked with products carrying the new printed codes. A man named Clyde Dawson, who ran research and development for Marsh, walked up to the checkout with a small basket of items. He was the customer in this little piece of theater. Behind the register stood a cashier named Sharon Buchanan. The very first thing Dawson reached for was not chosen at random, though the story has a charm that makes it feel like fate. It was a 10-pack of Wrigley's Juicy Fruit chewing gum. There is a practical reason it was the gum and not something larger. The team had wondered whether a barcode could even be printed on something as small as a pack of gum and still be read, and they wanted to prove that it could. Sharon Buchanan slid the little yellow pack across the glass. The laser swept across the stripes, and the register did something no register had ever done before. Without anyone typing a single key, it knew. It read the pattern, looked up the number, and rang the gum up. 67 cents. There was no fanfare in the store. The other shoppers kept shopping. The morning went on, but in that ordinary instant, the bottleneck that had defined American shopping for 100 years, the cashier hunting for a price and punching it in by hand, quietly came to an end. A beam of light had read a number off a pack of gum, and retail would never go back. That pack of juicy fruit and the receipt from that morning are now treated as historical objects, kept and remembered for what they marked. One of those original Marsh scanners found a home in the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History in Washington, as a relic of the day the machines learned to read our groceries. There is a small, honest footnote worth mentioning, because this is a true story and not a tidy legend. The museum has noted that it did not actually keep the original pack of gum itself, and that what was shown for years was a facsimile that told the tale. The legend, like all good legends, has been polished a little smoother than the facts. But the core of it is solid. On that June morning in Ohio, the first real product ever scanned by a barcode in a working store was a pack of Wrigley's Juicy Fruit gum, rung up for 67 cents by a cashier named Sharon Buchanan. From that one register in one Ohio town, the change spread, though not as fast as you might think. The barcode had a slow and rocky start. The scanners and computers were expensive, and a single store could not justify the cost until enough products carried the code, and the manufacturers would not bother printing the code until enough stores had the scanners. It was a standoff. For the system to pay off, almost everyone had to join at once, and at first, only a trickle did. A few years after that first scan, only a small fraction of American stores had gone over to scanning. There was also a fight that most people have forgotten, and it came from shoppers themselves. The whole promise of the system, to the stores, was that they could stop stamping a price on every single item, because the computer held the price now. But customers had spent their whole lives reading the price right there on the can, and they did not trust a machine they could not see. If the sticker was gone, how would you know they were not cheating you at the register? The worry was loud enough that consumer advocates took up the cause, and several states passed laws forcing stores to keep a price marked on each item anyway, scanner or no scanner. People did not surrender their pencil and sticker world without a struggle. But the math of it was too strong to resist forever. A scanning checkout was faster, and the speed paid for the scanner. The store finally had clean, exact numbers on what was selling and what was not, which meant it could order smarter, waste less, and stock the shelves with what people actually bought. The chains that scanned pulled ahead of the chains that did not. One by one, the holdouts gave in. The trickle became a flood. By the 1980s, the little stripes were spreading across the whole grocery world, and then out past the grocery store, into department stores and pharmacies and hardware stores, onto books and magazines and medicine bottles, until the question stopped being which things had a barcode and became which things did not. And here is the part that the two young men on that beach could never have imagined, because they were only ever trying to fix a checkout line. The barcode did not stay at the checkout. It quietly walked out the front door and reorganized the entire hidden world that feeds the store. Once every product had a unique number a machine could read in an instant, you could track that product everywhere. You could scan a pallet of goods as it left a factory, scan it again as it arrived at a warehouse, scan it onto a truck, scan it off the truck, and scan it onto the shelf. And at every step, a computer knew exactly where it was. The barcode became the nervous system of modern logistics. It is the reason a store can carry tens of thousands of different items and rarely run out of any of them. It is the reason a company can know, to the unit, what sits in a warehouse 1,000 miles away. The just-in-time delivery that keeps the modern economy humming, the package you order at midnight and hold in your hands 2 days later, all of it rides on the simple ability to give every object a name that light can read. There is a quiet irony in how this turned out. The grocers who first wanted the barcode wanted it to speed up a line. What they actually got was a machine that could see their entire business for the first time. Every beep at the register was now a piece of information, captured and counted. For the first time in the history of retail, a company could know precisely what sold on a rainy Tuesday, which brand a price cut moved and which it did not, how fast a shelf emptied and when to fill it. That river of data became as valuable as the speed at the checkout, maybe more. The little stripes did not just make shopping faster, they turned the store into something that could think about itself. You feel that invisible system every day and never notice it, which was always the point. The barcode succeeded so completely that it became part of the furniture of life. When the cashier sweeps your groceries over the glass and you hear that little beep, that is Joseph Woodland's sand drawing, refined by George Laurer, working exactly as intended. When a delivery driver scans your package onto your porch and your phone buzzes to tell you it has arrived, that is the same lines. When a nurse scans the band on a patient's wrist and then scans the medicine to make sure they match, the barcode is quietly standing guard against a deadly mistake. When you board a plane and a reader glances at the code on your phone, when a library checks out your book, when a runner crosses a finish line wearing a tag, the descendants of those 4 grooves in the sand are doing the work. The pattern Woodland pulled out of the beach has been printed, by now, untold trillions of times. It may be the most reproduced human design in history, and almost no one knows the name of the man who drew it. Joseph Woodland lived long enough to see all of it. He stayed at IBM for decades and watched his abandoned idea become the unremarked-upon backbone of global commerce. In 1992, President George H.W. Bush awarded him the National Medal of Technology, one of the highest honors the country gives an inventor, for the code he had dreamed up on a beach when he was a broke 20-something who had dropped out of school. He died in 2012, at the age of 91. His old partner Bernard Silver had been gone for nearly 50 years by then, having died without ever seeing the gum scanned in Troy, without ever hearing a single beep at a register, his share of the credit forever attached to a story most people will never hear. Think about the strange shape of it. An idea so good and so far ahead of its time that it was patented, abandoned, sold for $15,000, and left to expire, and yet so necessary that the world spent 25 years building the tools to finally make it work. A breakthrough born not in a lab but on an empty beach, from a man absent-mindedly running his fingers through the sand. A revolution that arrived not with a bang, but with a single quiet beep over a pack of chewing gum, while the other shoppers in the store never even looked up. So the next time you are standing in line and you watch your groceries glide across the scanner, one after another, each one answered by that small electronic beep, slow down for just a second and really see it. That sound is the end of 100 years of waiting in line. It is the ghost of a man's fingers in Miami sand in 1949, and a friend who died before it ever worked, and a printer's smear that killed a circle, and a pack of juicy fruit gum on an Ohio morning in 1974. It is one of the most important inventions of the modern world, and it was built to be invisible, to do its job and ask for nothing, not even your attention. You have looked right past it your entire life. Now you know whose idea it was, and what it took to put those little black lines on almost everything you have ever owned. If you enjoy uncovering the hidden histories behind the ordinary things all around you, take a moment to subscribe and stay with us for the next forgotten story.